You can make fire right now in about 1 second. There's probably something within arm's reach that does it. A lighter, a stove, a match, a spark on an igniter you've never once thought about. You've never had to consider it. Fire is a button. Now take the button away. Take away every match, every lighter, every piece of steel. Take away everything manufactured. You're standing in a forest with your hands, some wood, and a rock, and the temperature is dropping. Go ahead, make fire. Most people would die, not metaphorically, genuinely die, sitting next to all the materials they needed, unable to turn them into flame. Because making fire from nothing is one of the hardest things a human being can be asked to do, and almost the entire species has forgotten how. Here's the part that surprised me most when I looked into it. For most of human history, your ancestors couldn't do it either. There's a gap in this story that almost nobody talks about, and it changes everything. Using fire and making fire are two completely different things. Fire exists in nature. Lightning strikes dry grassland. Volcanic activity ignites vegetation. Wildfires burn across a landscape every dry season, and in the aftermath, they leave behind smoldering wood, glowing stumps, coals sitting in ash. Any creature clever enough and brave enough to walk toward that instead of away from it can pick up a burning branch and carry fire home. That's not making fire, that's harvesting it. And the evidence suggests humans were doing exactly that for an extraordinarily long time before anyone figured out how to create a flame from cold materials. At Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, Francesco Berna and his colleagues found microscopic traces of ash from plant material and burned bone fragments deep inside the cave, in layers dated to roughly 1 million years ago. Not a scatter at the entrance where a wildfire could have blown embers in 30 meters back, in sediment that hadn't been disturbed. Something carried fire into that cave and kept it burning. At Gesher Benot Ya'aqov in Israel, Naama Goren Inbar's team documented burned flint fragments clustered in specific patches, roughly 790,000 years old, in a pattern that looks like repeated hearth use in fixed locations across many occupation layers. And at Qesem Cave, Ran Barkai and Avi Gopher excavated a central hearth used over and over across tens of thousands of years, a single spot in the cave that generations of people returned to and burned fires in, around 300,000 years ago. That's hundreds of thousands of years of fire use. And in none of it is there clear evidence of a fire-making tool. They had fire, they just didn't have the ability to start it, which means fire was inherited. Think about what that actually implies day to day. If you cannot create fire, then the fire you have is the only fire you will ever have. It came from your parents' camp, which came from theirs. It might be older than anyone alive. Every night, someone is responsible for it. Every move to new ground, someone carries it. In a coal wrapped in bark, in a slow-burning bracket fungus, in a clay-lined container packed with embers. If it goes out, you don't restart it. You go and ask someone else. You walk to another group whose language you might not share and whose intentions you can't be certain of, and you ask them for fire. And if the nearest group is 4 days away in winter, you may not survive the walk. That's the world. For a very long stretch of human existence, fire was a thing you protected the way you protect a life, because functionally, it was one. And it was worth every bit of that effort, because of what fire did to the inside of your body. Richard Wrangham at Harvard laid out the argument in detail. Cooking is what made us. Raw food is expensive. It takes enormous chewing effort and a long, energy-hungry digestive tract to break down. Cooking does part of that work externally. It gelatinizes starches, denatures proteins, kills parasites, and softens tissue so drastically that the calories come out with a fraction of the internal cost. Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler framed the consequence as a trade-off. Brain tissue and gut tissue are both metabolically expensive. A body running on a tight energy budget can't max out both. Cooked food let the gut shrink, and the energy freed up by a smaller gut was available for something else. Compare a chimpanzee to a human. Chimps spend around 6 hours a day chewing. Humans spend under an hour. Chimps have a large gut and a smaller brain. We have a compact gut and a brain that burns roughly a fifth of our resting energy. Fire didn't just keep your ancestors warm and safe from predators. Fire is a substantial part of the reason you have the brain you're currently using to think about fire. So how did anyone eventually crack it? How do you get flame out of cold wood? There are only 2 physical routes, and both are harder than they look. The first is friction. You're not rubbing sticks together. That phrase has made this sound easy for 100 years, and it's actively misleading. What you're doing is grinding a hard spindle into a softer baseboard fast enough and with enough downward pressure that the friction shears off fine, hot dust. That dust collects in a notch cut into the board. It builds up, it darkens. And if you keep going past the point where your arms are screaming, that little pile of black powder reaches somewhere around 400 degrees Celsius and begins to sustain its own combustion. That's the ember. It's the size of a match head. It is not a flame, and it will die in seconds if you look at it wrong. The hand drill, a straight spindle spun between the palms, is the oldest and simplest version, and it is brutal. Your hands travel down the shaft as you press, so you have to keep releasing and repositioning without losing speed or heat. The fire plow works differently, grinding a stick along a groove to push hot dust ahead of it. The bow drill, which uses a cord and a bow to spin the spindle and a socket to press down from above, is far more efficient and consistent, and it's also a later, more complex piece of equipment, requiring cordage and a bearing block. Every version requires that the wood be genuinely dry, not seams dry, dry inside. In a wet climate, in winter, after days of rain, friction fire can be effectively impossible no matter how skilled you are. The second route is percussion, and this one is more interesting than most people realize. Striking two flints together does not give you fire. It gives you a spark of the wrong kind, cold, brief, and useless for ignition. The trick is striking flint against iron pyrite or marcasite, iron sulfide minerals that shed tiny fragments which oxidize and burn in the air as they fly. Those are hot sparks. Those can land in tinder and take. We know this was real because a fire kit survived. Ötzi the Iceman, the naturally mummified body found in the Alps and dated to roughly 5,300 years ago, was carrying equipment that included pyrite traces and fragments of tinder fungus, Fomes fomentarius, a bracket fungus that grows on dead trees and whose inner layer can be processed into a material that catches a spark and holds a smolder for a very long time. That's a complete, portable, deliberate ignition system. Mineral, striker, tinder, carried in a pouch, ready to go. And it may go back much further than us. Andrew Sorensen and colleagues at Leiden University examined Neanderthal hand axes from sites in France and found micro-wear traces along the flat faces, a pattern consistent with repeatedly striking the tool against a lump of pyrite. If that interpretation holds, Neanderthals were making fire on demand around 50,000 years ago. But here's where it gets genuinely contested, and I think this is the most interesting part of the whole story. Dennis Sandgath and Harold Dibble, working through decades of excavation data from Neanderthal sites in southwest France, noticed something strange. Fire use at those sites wasn't constant. It rose and fell, and the pattern didn't match what you'd expect if Neanderthals could make fire whenever they wanted. There was abundant fire evidence during warmer periods, and during the coldest stretches, exactly when you'd want fire most desperately, the evidence for it thins out dramatically. That pattern makes very little sense for a species with fire-making technology. It makes complete sense for a species that harvests fire from the landscape. Warm periods mean more vegetation, more lightning-driven wildfire, more opportunity to go and collect a burning branch. Cold glacial periods mean a sparse, frozen landscape where natural fire is rare and there's simply nothing to collect. If Sandgath and Dibble are right, then Neanderthals were sitting in Ice Age Europe, freezing, surrounded by wood, unable to light it. The debate isn't settled. Sorensen's micro-wear evidence points the other way, and different sites tell different stories. But the fact that this is even a live argument tells you something. Reliable fire-making is not the ancient, universal human birthright we assume it is. It's a late, hard-won capability, and there may have been intelligent, tool-using, culturally sophisticated humans who never fully got there. There's one more thing, and it's the piece everybody underestimates. The ember is not the hard part. The tinder is. You can produce a perfect glowing coal and still fail completely because that coal has to be transferred into a bundle of extremely fine, extremely dry material and then coaxed into flame with controlled breath. Too little air, and it dies. Too much, and you blow it apart. The material has to be fibrous enough to hold air, dry enough to catch, and prepared in advance. Bark shredded down to hair-fine fibers, seed down, dried grass worked soft between the hands, processed fungus, which means the real skill isn't in the drill or the strike at all. It's in knowing, weeks before you need it, which tree's inner bark makes good tinder, and keeping some of it dry against your body while it rains. Fire-making isn't a moment. It's a supply chain that starts long before the spark. So here's where all of it lands. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived with fire they could not create. They stole it from the landscape, carried it across generations, guarded it through nights and winters and migrations, and organized entire social structures around not letting it die. The ability to sit down with a rock and a stick and produce flame from nothing came late, and it may never have come at all for some of our relatives. When it finally did arrive, it changed the terms of human existence completely. You were no longer dependent on inheritance. You were no longer dependent on your neighbor's goodwill. You could walk into an empty, freezing, unfamiliar landscape and make it survivable on your own. Everything humans did afterward, the ice ages we walked into, the continents we crossed, the nights we stopped being afraid of, runs through that. And you can do it in 1 second, with a thing in your pocket you'd throw away without thinking. That's not a criticism. It's just worth noticing occasionally. Somewhere behind that little click is 100,000 generations of people who never let it go out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.